Zelda games are weird, because they can look completely different from each other and still somehow feel connected. Wind Waker is bright and colorful, and basically says, what if Hyrule had a massive ocean and a boat with a face? Twilight Princess is darker, moodier, and has this whole forest and shadow thing going on. Majora's Mask feels like someone took Ocarina of Time and trapped it inside some cursed clock. Breath of the Wild feels quiet and huge, like the world has already happened and you're just walking through what is left of it. And then Tears of the Kingdom takes that same world and goes, okay, but what if there was also a sky, and caves, and a nightmare basement? And somehow, after a few minutes, your brain still goes, yeah, this is a Zelda game. Not because every game has the exact same tone. They really don't. Some Zelda games are cozy, some are lonely, some are weird, some are kind of sad, and some feel like a fairy tale. But Zelda is really good at carrying a certain feeling forward. The music, the nature, the villages, the sound of opening a chest. The little shops, the pots, and all of that stuff adds up. And I think that is what I love most about the series. Not just the puzzles or the dungeons, and definitely not the timeline, which I'm not touching too hard because I enjoy having a peaceful life. It is the atmosphere. That feeling that you're stepping into a place that is new, but somehow already familiar. I think the mistake is assuming Zelda has one vibe. The original Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, Breath of the Wild are all doing very different things, but they're all pulling from the same weird pile of ingredients. You usually start somewhere small. Then the world gets bigger than you expected. A forest that feels safe until it does not. A village theme that makes you want to stop moving for a second. A cave you almost missed. And some shopkeeper with a face you'd identify from across a parking lot. Then there are the little rituals. Chests, keys, rupees, and sounds that hit your brain before you even think about them. This is the important part. Zelda games do not feel like they're all connected because Link is wearing the same outfit. It stays connected because it remembers the same little rituals. Every game has its own weather, but the rituals are still all there. The first Legend of Zelda is kind of funny to go back to now, because it is so bare compared to what the series has become. There's no long cinematic intro, no village full of charming little freaks, and no slow tutorial where someone teaches you how to pick up a rock for 12 minutes. You just appear in the world, walk into a cave, and an old man gives you a sword. And then it's like, alright, good luck. That first game has a very specific atmosphere of being small in a world that does not care if you understand it yet. It's not lonely in a sad, cinematic way. It is lonely in a practical way. Like, you are outside, there are monsters, and the world is made of rocks and bushes and suspicious walls. And the game is not going to stop every 4 seconds to explain itself. That matters, because even when Zelda becomes more story-heavy and more polished, that old feeling never goes away. That feeling of wondering if there is something over there. If this wall breaks, if that sound means you did something right. That is Zelda at the most basic. Curiosity, danger, and a little bit of, I have no idea if I'm supposed to be here. And weirdly, decades later, Breath of the Wild loops back around to that. It obviously looks nothing like the NES game, but emotionally there is a connection. You walk into Hyrule, see a mountain, and the game mostly trusts that you are nosy enough to go find out what's on it. That is a very old Zelda feeling, just with like better grass and stuff. Then A Link to the Past is where Zelda starts to feel more like the Zelda people imagine when they think of classic Zelda. The opening is still one of the best tone setters in the whole series. Link wakes up during a storm. Zelda is calling to him, his uncle leaves the house, and when you follow him out into the rain, the world suddenly feels bigger than it did 5 minutes ago. It is such a simple setup, but it works because Zelda is really good at starting small. You're not beginning with a lore lecture, you're in a house, it is raining, something is wrong, and the game basically just says, go. And then the game does something that becomes very Zelda. It gives you a world, lets you get used to it, and then shows you the wrong version. The Dark World is not just a second map, it is Hyrule with a bad fever. The layout is familiar, but the mood is different. The trees are worse, the water is worse, and the people are worse. Or not people anymore. Everything feels warped. And that idea keeps coming back in different forms. You see it in the Dark World, Termina, the Twilight Realm, Laurel, the Depths, and the Still World in Echoes of Wisdom. Zelda loves taking something familiar and making it feel a little wrong. And I think that is one of the biggest reasons these games stick. Link's Awakening is one of the best examples of how atmosphere can survive without a lot of the obvious Zelda furniture. You're not really in Hyrule. The whole thing takes place on Koholint Island. There's no normal go save the princess setup. There's no big Hyrule castle structure sitting there telling you what kind of story this is. You wash up on a beach, a girl named Marine finds you, and the island slowly becomes this cozy, strange, dreamlike place. And I love that, because Link's Awakening feels cute. Especially now with the Switch remake, where the whole thing looks like a tiny little toy set. But underneath that, the game has this weird sadness to it. The more you understand what Koholint is, the more the adventure starts to feel like you're enjoying a place that maybe cannot last. It is also just extremely weird in that old Nintendo way. There are Mario enemies, chain chomp, phone booths, a giant egg on a mountain. The whole thing feels like someone had some weird melatonin Zelda dream. Like, I have no idea what's going on. But it still feels like Zelda. Because you still have all the rituals, you explore the village, find the dungeon, get the item, open the world a little more, and hear a song you're going to remember forever. And that is why Link's Awakening is important to this conversation. It proves Zelda is not only Hyrule. It is a way of making a place feel discoverable. We all know when we see Ocarina of Time, we think, that is Zelda. Not because it invented every idea, it did not, but because it translated so much of the series into 3D in a way that basically rewired how people imagined Hyrule. And again, it starts small. Kokiri Forest is not just a tutorial area. It is home. Tree houses, a shop, little paths and a bridge, and the great Deku Tree sitting there like a forest god. It feels safe, kind of. But the game is already telling you that safety is temporary. The Deku Tree is cursed. Link is different from the other Kokiri. The forest is protective, but also a boundary. And then you leave. That first walk out into Hyrule Field still works. It does not matter that that field is technically empty compared to modern open worlds. It feels huge because the game understands contrast. You go from a little forest village to open field, from childhood to the wider world, from tree houses to castles, ranches, mountains, lakes, graveyards, and deserts. That is atmosphere through structure. The game is not just showing you places, it is teaching you the emotional shape of adventure. Home, departure, wonder, danger, and then return. And then the time skip makes that hurt. When you come back as adult Link, familiar places have changed. Castle Town is ruined. The forests have monsters. And the world you knew as a kid has been damaged. And that is such a Zelda move. Not just because the villain is bad, more like, here is a place you knew. Now feel what happened to it. The music is doing a lot of work too. There's a Nintendo interview about Ocarina of Time 3D, where they talk about Hyrule's field's music changing depending on what is happening. Normal exploration, battle, quiet moments. It is not that just a loop playing over the field. It breathes with you. And they also talk about the little screen music, with the ocarina sounding like it is coming from somewhere far away in the forest. That is such a small thing, but it is exactly what I mean. Zelda atmosphere is not only this song is good, it is also asking where the sound feels like it is coming from. Is it in front of you, far away, lonely, safe, or quietly telling you to move? The answer changes depending on the game. But Zelda always cares about that question. Then Majora's Mask comes along, does one of my favorite things a sequel can do. It reuses a lot. The same basic engine, the same visual DNA, some familiar faces, and the same Link from Ocarina's child timeline. And somehow it feels like a completely different universe. This is why I like thinking of every Zelda game as having its own weather. Ocarina feels like a grand adventure with childhood and memory baked into it. Majora feels like the last 3 days before a town gets crushed by the moon. Which, to be fair, is what it is. The 3-day cycle is not just a gimmick, it changes the air in the room. Clocktown does not feel like a normal hub because everybody is on a schedule. People move around, worry, deny what is happening, leave, stay, and try to keep living like the sky is not actively threatening them. You keep rewinding time, but they do not get to remember it the way you do. So the whole game feels haunted by routine. It is not horror exactly. It's more uncomfortable than that. Because the world keeps acting normal while the moon gets lower and lower. And that is a very specific kind of Zelda darkness. Zelda is usually not scary in a clean horror game way. It is scary in little pockets. A graveyard, a well, a mask salesman smiling too hard, a hand reaching from the ceiling, a room where the music is barely music anymore. Majora's Mask turns those pockets into the whole weather system. And the wild thing is, it still has the rituals. You explore, solve dungeons, collect items, and help weird people with weird problems. But the meaning changes because everything is temporary. Same skeleton, completely different weather. Wind Waker is probably the atmosphere that stuck to me the hardest. I do not know if it is my favorite Zelda in every category, but it is the one that immediately comes to mind when I think of the series having a feeling. It is the color, the music, the water, the little islands, the way Link's face reacts to everything, and the way the ocean can feel huge and empty and peaceful and annoying and beautiful, sometimes within all the same 5 minutes. I love that game. And part of it is probably timing. Wind Waker hit North America in 2003 after releasing in Japan at the end of 2002. And around that same early 2000s window, you also had games like Super Mario Sunshine and Kingdom Hearts, giving my brain a lot of beaches, islands, blue skies, ocean, and like weird vacation energy. There was a vibe to it all. Wind Waker's whole world is built on that feeling. At the surface, it is bright, funny, expressive, and very proudly cartoon looking. And that look was actually very controversial at the time. Some people really did not know what to do with Toon Link. They wanted more of the darker, more realistic Zelda that they had been teased before. And instead, Nintendo showed up with this big-eyed kid in a tiny boat. And I get why that's jarring, but man, that art style aged like fine wine. The reason it works, it's not just that it is cute. The style lets the characters feel alive. Link's eyes move, his face sells little jokes, the enemies are readable, and the NPCs can be strange without looking broken. The whole game has an elastic quality to it. The style and the world are not separate. The ocean works because of the style, and the style works because of the ocean. And then, underneath all that brightness, Wind Waker is kind of sad. Because this is not just a happy ocean. This is Hyrule after a flood where the islands are the mountain tops of the old world. And that legend is literally underneath you as you sail across. So while you're sailing around all this blue, cheerful sunlight, there's a buried kingdom below. That contrast gives Wind Waker its actual atmosphere. It's not just the happy Zelda. It is the bright Zelda with a drowned Hyrule under it. That is very, very different. And even in the ocean game, Zelda cannot resist the forest. Forest Haven is one of my favorite examples of the series carrying atmosphere forward. In Ocarina, you have Kokiri Forest and the Great Deku Tree. In Wind Waker, the world is mostly water, but then you find this giant forest island with the Deku Tree and the Koroks. The Kokiri idea has changed. The world changed around them. But the feeling is still recognizable. A forest guardian, tiny strange forest people, a place that feels protected from the rest of the world, the Deku Leaf, the music. That is the Zelda continuity in the way that actually matters to me. Not just where it sits on a timeline chart, but the feeling of, oh, I know this kind of place. And even when I've never been to this exact version of it. And Wind Waker is also great because it has one of the clearest atmosphere lineages in the whole series. Wind Waker goes into Phantom Hourglass. Then Phantom Hourglass goes into Spirit Tracks. And that little branch is fascinating because it shows how Zelda can keep a visual language while completely changing the texture of the world. Phantom Hourglass is set sometime after Wind Waker. Link and Tetra are out sailing, they find a ghost ship, Tetra gets taken, and then Venture moves into this new sea ruled by the Ocean King. It is still Toon Link, still bright, still nautical, but it is also very DS. You draw on the map, you move with the stylus, you write notes, so the atmosphere changes from I am sailing across a huge TV screen-sized ocean to I'm poking at a little haunted sea on a handheld. That sounds less magical, but I do not mean it in that way. Handheld Zelda has its own intimacy. It feels closer to you. Phantom Hourglass also has Linebeck, which matters because Zelda has side characters that do a lot of atmospheric work. He's not just the boat guy. He brings this cowardly, treasure-hunting, selfish, but maybe not that selfish energy that makes the game feel a little more scrappy. Wind Waker has mythic ocean adventure. Phantom Hourglass has, we are on a boat with this dude, I do not fully trust him, but he is funny. That is a different flavor. Then Spirit Tracks takes another giant swing. Spirit Tracks is set about 100 years later in a new Hyrule, and now the boat is gone. Now, it's a train! Which sounds like a joke. If you describe Spirit Tracks to someone who has never seen it, it sounds like a bad dream. Yeah, this is the Zelda where Link is a train engineer. And yet, once the train starts moving and the horn goes off, it kind of works. Because transportation is atmosphere in Zelda. The horse changes Ocarina and Twilight Princess. The boat changes Wind Waker. The Loftwing changes Skyward Sword. The paraglider changes Breath of the Wild. And the train changes Spirit Tracks. It makes the world feel more connected, more industrial, more scheduled. The tracks are not just a way to travel. They are the shape of the kingdom. And Spirit Tracks also make Zelda herself feel different. She's not just a distant princess or a memory, her spirit is with you, and she's expressive, scared, funny, involved, and able to possess phantoms. Is one of the better Link and Zelda dynamics because the game actually lets them be a little duo together. That Wind Waker branch goes from ocean myth to handheld ghost ship to train adventure in a new kingdom, same tune language, totally different travel feeling. That is exactly what I mean by atmosphere continuing between games without it repeating itself. And this is not only the big 3D games. Some of the smaller Zelda games have some of the strongest atmospheres because they pick one strange idea and just commit to it. The Minish Cap is a perfect example. That game asks, what if Zelda was about noticing a tiny world hidden inside the normal one? And that is such a good Zelda idea, because Zelda already trains you to be suspicious of ordinary places. A wall might break, a bush might hide stairs, and a rock might cover a hole. The Minish Cap just pushes that idea into a tiny scan. When Link shrinks down, a normal desk becomes a landscape. House rafters become secret pathways. Tiny people are living in corners of Hyrule that everyone walks past. The atmosphere is not big, epic kingdom. It is, the world is full of little lives you are too large to notice. And that's kind of lovely. Then the Oracle games do their own thing. Oracle of Seasons makes the seasons the atmosphere machine. You're not just walking through a forest. You're changing what the forest is. Winter, spring, summer, fall, paths opening, water freezing, colors shifting. The world becomes a little puzzle of weather. Oracle of Ages does it with time, past and present. Same idea, Zelda keeps returning to. The same place, changed by another state, light and dark, child and adult, past and present, surface and depths, Hyrule and Lowrule. A Link Between Worlds is interesting because it goes back to the map language of A Link to the Past, but it does not just do nostalgic karaoke. It lets Link become a painting on the wall, which is one of those mechanics that is also an atmosphere idea. Suddenly every wall is not just a boundary, it is a surface you can just slip into. The old map feels new because you're moving through it in a way you could not before. And then Echoes of Wisdom does another version of that. For once, Zelda is the main playable hero in a new mainline style adventure. Link is missing. Rifts are opening around Hyrule. Zelda uses the Tri-Rod to create echoes of objects and monsters, so the atmosphere changes again. Instead of the world being mostly a place where you find tools, and it becomes a place where almost anything can become part of your toolset. A table, a bed, even a monster is not just scenery or an obstacle anymore. It is potential. That feels very modern Zelda, but also very old Zelda. Because Zelda has always been about looking at the environment and thinking, can I use that? Echoes just makes that question the entire game. Twilight Princess is the obvious contrast to Wind Waker. If Wind Waker is blue sky and ocean, Twilight Princess is dirt, forest, and shadow. It is darker visually with a more grounded fantasy look. And I know Twilight Princess gets talked about as the dark one a lot. Sometimes fairly, sometimes in a way that makes it sound like the game is just trying to be edgy. But I think the better word is heavy. The opening in Ordon Village is slow, maybe too slow depending on your patience, but atmospherically, it is doing something clear. Link is not just a boy in a forest, he is a ranch worker with neighbors, village kids around him, errands, and a horse. The world starts domestic before it gets mythic, and when the twilight starts spreading, it feels like something is invading a normal life. That is the key. Zelda often works best when the fantasy threatens a place that has a routine. Kokiri Forest had one, Clocktown had one, Outset Island had one, Ordone has one. Then the game breaks it. Twilight Princess is also still extremely Zelda, because it is weird. People sometimes talk about it like it is the serious, realistic one, and then Oko shows up. Like, excuse me, what is that? How do I even say that? Like, this is not Lord of the... Like, I don't even know what this is. This is like a chicken nightmare with a baby head, and it's somehow here to help you leave the dungeon. Okay. This is why I love Zelda, I guess. Even when the game is trying to be darker and more grounded, it cannot stop itself from being strange. Midna, Malomart, the Yetis in Snow Peak, the Twilight creatures, they all keep the odd little pulse underneath the serious fantasy shell. And that is why it still feels like Zelda. Not because it looks like Wind Waker, obviously does not, but because the underlying language is still there. Village, forest, field, horse, dungeon, music, chest, weird, helper, and at least one moment where you look at a character and go, Nintendo, what are you doing? Essential ingredient right there. Skyward Sword has a really interesting atmosphere because it splits the world in half. Above the clouds, you have Skyloft, a bright floating hometown of a school, villagers, and loftwings. And then below the clouds, you have the surface, Faron Woods, Eldin Volcano, Lenaru Desert. These places do not feel like one big connected Hyrule in the way Ocarina or Breath of the Wild do. They feel more like dense outdoor dungeons, which some people like and some people do not. I get both reactions there. But atmospherically, it gives Skyward Sword a very particular identity. The sky is home. The surface is the unknown. Every time Link dives through the clouds, it feels like he is leaving the safe layer of the world. And the areas below are very color-coded and tactile. Faron is forest and water. Eldin is heat and lava. And Lenaru is desert, ancient technology and time. The Lenaru time shift stones are maybe the coolest atmosphere idea in that game. You're walking through a dead desert, but then you activate a stone and a little bubble of the past comes back. Grass returns, robots wake up, machines work again, and then the music and color shift. For a second, the dead place remembers being alive. That is extremely Zelda. Again, it is the same trick. Same place, different state. And suddenly the atmosphere has a story before anyone explains anything. Breath of the Wild is one of the biggest atmospheric shifts in this series, because it takes away a lot of the noise. Not literally all noise, but the old constant musical push is mostly gone. The world has room to breathe. You hear wind, grass, footsteps, and little piano notes that come and go, like the game is remembering Zelda music instead of constantly playing it. And the setup is perfect for that. Link wakes up after 100 years, after Hyrule already lost, and Calamity Ganon already destroyed the kingdom. Zelda has been holding him back, but you're not trying to prevent the apocalypse. You're walking through the aftermath. That changes everything. In a lot of Zelda games, you start in a living world, then watch danger arrive. In Breath of the Wild, danger arrived a century ago. So the atmosphere is less, can we stop the kingdom from failing? And more, what grows after the kingdom fell? That is why the ruins matter so much. The broken guardians, the old roads, the Temple of Time on the Great Plateau, the castle in the distance, and all the places where nature has just been quietly kept growing. Zelda has always been good at making a place feel old before you know anything about it. Breath of the Wild turns that into the entire world. And the rituals are still there, but they have changed shape. Instead of finding a dungeon item that lets you explore one new type of obstacle, you're using physics, food, weather, stamina, fire, metal, ice, and whatever ridiculous idea you just happen to have. You still open chests, collect rupees, hear little musical signals, and find fairy fountains. and get chased by chickens if you make poor life choices. But the atmosphere is less about a locked sequence and more about paying attention. That is why Breath of the Wild still feels like Zelda, even though it throws a lot of traditional structure out the window. The old curiosity is still there though. It just has more grass, more physics, and more cliffs you absolutely should not climb in the rain. But will anyway, because you just gotta give it a whirl. Tears of the Kingdom has a weird challenge because it is using the same broad Hyrule as Breath of the Wild. So the question becomes, how do you make the same world feel atmospheric again? And the answer is, you just stack it on top of each other. You have the sky, and surface, and caves, and then wells, and then depths. The game turns Hyrule into layers of Hyrule. The sky islands feel ancient and clean and lonely. The surface feels familiar but changed. The caves make the world feel more porous, like there's always something underneath your feet. And the depths are basically Hyrule's negative space. Dark, huge, uncomfortable, full of gloom and silhouettes, and that feeling that you are very far from a stable. If Breath of the Wild is about walking through the quiet after a disaster, Tears of the Kingdom is about realizing the world still has more hidden under it, above it, inside it, and attached to it. The new abilities also change the atmosphere, because they change how you look at objects. In older Zelda, you might see a block and think, can I push that? In Tears, you see a plank of wood and think, can this be a car? Then 5 minutes later, it is a car. But that is still Zelda logic. Tools changing how you read the world. It is just louder now, more chaotic, and more player-driven, and yet the atmosphere is still built on the same foundation. Ancient ruins, strange technology, music that gives you room, little rituals, a world that feels bigger than your current understanding of it. Saying Zelda music is good is about as controversial as saying water is wet. But I think it's worth being specific. Zelda music works because it is tied to place. Kakariko Village does not just have a song. The song helps define what Kakariko is. The fairy fountain theme does not just mean pretty music. It means safety, magic, healing, and maybe a little of, why is this fairy 6 stories tall? Gerudo Valley feels like a place before you even remember the layout. Dragon Roost Island has a whole personality in the melody. Clock Town changes because time is running out. Breath of the Wild barely gives you music sometimes, and then other times it becomes the entire point. And the series has been careful about this for a long time. Like with Ocarina of Time, the field music was designed to shift depending on what was happening. Normal exploration, battle, quiet is not just a theme pasted over a field. It is part of the field. In that same Nintendo interview when they were talking about Ocarina of Time 3D, they get weirdly detailed about sound. They talk about making the little screen ocarina sound like it's coming from somewhere off distance in the forest. They talk about sound affecting timing so it still feels right despite the 3DS running differently than the N64. This is the kind of stuff players do not always consciously notice, but you feel it. The timing of a fanfare, the pull of a collectible, the way a chest opening builds, the exact moment the sound resolves. That stuff is atmosphere too. Honestly, the chest sound alone probably rewired my brain a little bit. It is such a ridiculous little ritual. You walk up, the camera moves, the sound starts, the anticipation builds, and Link holds the item above his head like he discovered electricity. And even if the item is something stupid, your body is already trained to care. Same with rupees, hearts, keys, doors, pots, grass being cut, and the little "you solved it" sound. These are all tiny pieces of audio design, but they become emotional shortcuts. You hear them and your brain goes, oh, I know this place, I know this noise, I know what I'm doing here. Even if the game is new, even if the art style changed, even if Link is on a boat, a train, or a bird, or falling out of the sky for whatever reason, it all is connected. Another huge piece of Zelda atmosphere is the way games use home spaces. Zelda loves starting you somewhere small. Kokiri Forest, Outset Island, Ordon Village, the Skyloft. The Great Plateau is not a village, but it functions kinda like a starting place. Even Echoes of Wisdom starts by flipping the usual rescue setup, but it still wants you to understand Hyrule through places and people before it becomes a huge problem. These spaces matter because they give the adventure something to move away from. You need a little normal before the world opens. A house, a village, a grandma, a friend, a school, a ranch, something. Not because every story needs a cozy intro, but because Zelda is about crossing a threshold. There is the place you know, and then there is the place beyond it. And the shops are part of that too. Zelda shops are rarely just menus, they're little rooms with music and weird people. Beetle alone has done more atmosphere than some entire fictional governments. The shop theme starts and suddenly you're not just buying bombs, and you're in a little pocket of civilization. And then there is the weirdness. If you remove all the strange stuff, Zelda becomes much more generic fantasy. And Zelda is not generic fantasy at all. It has swords, princesses, and ancient evil, sure, but it also has Tingle, a moon with a face, a masked salesman who smiles like he knows when you're going to die, Cuckoo, Dead Hand, Sub-Roesians dancing underground, Tiny Minish living in furniture, and Beetle, who appears in wildly different eras like customer service is somehow eternal. And then there are Koroks hiding under rocks, giving you a seed that, if we are being honest, does raise some questions. The scary weirdness matters too, like Ocarina has the graveyard, the bottom of the well, and the Shadow Temple. Majora has basically the whole premise of the game is spooky. Twilight Princess has the Twilight Realm and some deeply uncomfortable creatures. Breath of the Wild has guardians, which are not horror, but are absolutely like horror monster audio and like make your heart rate instantly start. And Tears of the Kingdom has gloom hands, which feel like the game looked at everyone peacefully collecting mushrooms and said, let's just ruin that for everybody. That weirdness gives the world texture. It means Hyrule feels old and strange. Like there are rules here, but they're not all written down. And that is much more interesting than a fantasy world where everything is cleanly categorized. Zelda always feels like there is some odd little corner you have not found yet. Some guy in a cave, some creature under a bridge, some tree that talks, some old ritual involving a song, a mask, and a stone, and a chicken, or whatever. That is the good stuff. That is what we come for in Zelda games. So after all that, I think the reason Zelda still feels like Zelda is pretty simple. Not simple to make, obviously, but simple to feel. The games change the weather, but keep the ritual. The first Zelda gives you lonely wilderness. A Link to the Past gives you a stormy Hyrule and its corrupt mirror. Link's Awakening gives you a dream island. Ocarina of Time gives you childhood time and a 3D Hyrule that people still carry around in their heads. Then Majora turns that familiar shape into a doomed town in the same 3 days over and over and over. Wind Waker gives you a bright ocean with a drowned kingdom underneath. Phantom Hourglass turns that ocean into a handheld ghost story. And Spirit Tracks carries that same branch into rail lines and train whistles. After that, the series keeps changing angles. Minish Cap hides a tiny world inside the normal one. Twilight Princess covers the familiar structure in shadow and dirt. And weird chicken people. Skyward Sword splits safety above the clouds from danger below. Breath of the Wild turns Hyrule into ruins, wind, weather, and quiet discovery. Tears of the Kingdom stacks that world into sky, surface, caves, and darkness. Echoes of Wisdom hands that adventure to Zelda and turns ordinary objects into problem-solving magic. These games do not feel connected because they are identical. They feel connected because they remember the same little rituals. A chest is still a chest. A village is still a breath of fresh air before the danger. A forest is still probably hiding something. A song still turns a place into a memory. A weird NPC still makes the world feel handmade, and familiar place can become wrong. And Link can still stand at the edge of a world that is too big for him and make you want to walk forward. That is the magic trick. Zelda does not always bring you back to the same place. It brings you back to the feeling of recognizing a place you have never been. And I don't know if that's the best way to explain it. but it is the part that keeps working on me. That's all I got today, guys. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this content, please subscribe, leave a comment down below for what you want to see next, and I will see you next time. Thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it.